Welcome to the Federation for Children with Special Needs, Connecting Families. My name is Rebecca Davis. I am the manager of transition projects, and I'm going to turn it over to the translators to introduce themselves. Interpreters.
Hi, my name is Maple. I'm the Cantonese interpreter for today. 大家好，我係今日大家嘅廣東話翻譯。咁我哋陣間會係打開呢個同聲傳譯嘅頻道。咁希望大家喺屏幕嘅下方尋找呢個地球儀嘅標誌，點擊入去之後係選擇 Cantonese 呢個頻道。如果你係用手機或者平板電腦上網咧，咁你係點擊屏幕下方嘅3個點寫住多，進入語言嘅設置，亦都係揀 Cantonese 呢個頻道。陣間見啦 ，Thank you。
Hi everyone, my name is Naomi. I will be your Haitian Creole interpreter for tonight. Bonsoir, non pas c'est Naomi, moi c'est interprète pour langue créole haïtien. Pour attendre des présentations ça en créole, cliquez sur globe interprétation et puis choisir langue ou voulez. Dans cas pas nous on va choisir créole. Cliquez sur mute qui c'est silence, son original là pour attendre des présentations en créole seulement. Merci. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Wei. I will be your Mandarin Chinese interpreter today. 大家好，我是您今天的国语翻译委啊。如果您需要这个国语翻译的话呢，请点击屏幕下方的地球仪标记啊，然后呢点击国语Mandarin 翻译频道。如果你使用手机或者平板电脑的话呢，请找3个点，然后选择更多，然后进入这个翻译频道。Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Ana Lopes, Portuguese interpreter. Boa tarde a todos. Aqui é a Ana Lopes, que fará a interpretação de português para vocês. Dentro de alguns minutos, o dispositivo da interpretação será disponibilizado. Vocês verão um globo na parte inferior da tela. Clique no globo e selecione o idioma de português, se quiser ouvir em português, e coloque o áudio original no mudo, no silencioso.
Hola, me llamo Carlos Oliva, soy el intérprete de español. I'm going to be with you tonight. Para escuchar esta presentación en español, haga clic en el globo de la interpretación y seleccione el idioma que desee escuchar. En este caso sería español o Spanish. Haga clic en silenciar el audio original, o sea, mute original audio, para escuchar solo el idioma de la interpretación. Thank you.
Good evening, this is Lynn, the Vietnamese interpreter. Xin chào, tôi là Linh, tôi là phiên dịch tiếng Việt cho quý vị hôm nay. Nếu quý vị muốn nghe phiên dịch trực tiếp bằng tiếng Việt, xin vui lòng bấm vào biểu tượng quả địa cầu bên dưới màn hình, rồi chọn tiếng Việt, Vietnamese. Sau đó bấm Mute Original Audio, tắt tiếng Anh để chỉ nghe được tiếng Việt. Xin cảm ơn quý vị. Thank you and back to you.
Thank you so much. So we welcome all of our participants to this evening's Connecting Families, facilitated by the Federation for Children with Special Needs. My name is Rebecca Davis. I am the manager of transition projects. So we definitely want the families to know that if you do have a youth between the ages of 14 and 22, please reach out to us. We are here to help. I will let these two formidable advocates and mothers and forces of nature introduce themselves. We have a great program set up for you. And so take it away, ladies.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, and welcome everybody. My name is Elizabeth Bostic. I am the proud parent and humble servant of King James, and also I happen to be a board member and have, of course, gone through many trainings through the Federation over the years to help me with my own journey. We're really excited tonight to have Deborah Flaschen here with us to talk with us about transition from school-based to adult disability services. Like many of us, Deborah herself is also a proud parent of a young man with a developmental disability. And in her spare time, she is also the founder of 3L Place and its executive chair. She has over 30 years of high-level project management experience in both the private and public sectors. Senior Vice President in Investment Banking. She's worked with Lehman Brothers and Morgan Stanley for over 12 years, and also has been the founder, president, or chair of 3 autism-related nonprofit organizations. She's also been the parent advocate, of course, with a child on the autism spectrum for over 26 years. So needless to say, this is someone who comes to us with lived experience as well as lots of incredible corporate experience and combines those two together. A little bit about 3L Place, which is interesting because I have seen the logos for this many times at the Abilities Expo, and I'm so excited to finally know what it stands for. But 3L Place is an organization that empowers young adults with autism and other developmental disabilities to reach their individual potential, to follow their passion, and to live meaningful lives in the community. And they do this in 3 ways when they're building community online and in the Boston vicinity. They do it through, these are the 3 Ls, learning, living, and linking. And so Deborah is going to help us to understand a little bit more about 3L Place, but overall, just the topic of transition, which is heavy on many people's minds. And as Rebecca said, the Federation is here to assist you as you're going through the process and for students who are ages 14 to 22, or even sooner, because as you will learn, there is lots to prepare for, and transition in reality can start as soon as a child is born. And so Deborah is going to talk a little bit about that. And so she will do her presentation. And then as always, we have taken the questions that you have sent to us ahead of time. And so we will address as many of those as we possibly can. There will be also an opportunity for people to ask questions at the end of the presentation. And as always, any questions that we're not able to address or don't have time, which often happens, we will make sure that we write them down and address them in writing and put them up on the website for you. Okay, so with that, if everyone could please mute themselves so that we can make sure we minimize background noise. And Deborah and I are fiercely committed to talking slowly so that our interpreters can keep pace with us. But if we are moving too quickly, please make sure you let us know so that we can slow down. And so without further ado, take it away, Deborah.
Wow, thank you so much. And thank you, Beth, and thank you all the interpreters, and particularly I thank the Federation for Children with Special Needs for offering Connecting Families. I think it's a critically important function that they provide among many other services that they provide. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen and make this work.
Deb, you muted yourself.
Mute. Okay. All right. Thank you. So that's, I think we've covered that first page. So this is my family minus my husband. This young fellow in the middle is my son, David Jr. or DJ, and he is an artist. And actually that is his chosen profession, and he's really good at it. And DJ is a young autistic man at the age of 31, and his older sister, albeit smaller, is Catherine, who is neurotypical, and that's me. And one of the things that I really feel strongly about, and part of this is I'm drawing on my own experience back when DJ was 15 and 16 years old, and the transition process is much better organized now than it was then. There was almost no formal transition process back when we were going through it, but I was aware that 22 was approaching, and it was frightening. And it would have been helpful for somebody to encourage me to stop looking at my feet and taking one step at a time on my current path, and to look ahead, because it's really important to look ahead. So that's kind of my own personal advice to families is at the beginning of the transition process, take the time then to begin looking ahead. The other critical piece is that the individual, this young person who you've raised since infancy, is on the road to adulthood. And you need to presume competence, and you need to engage them in the planning process for their future. So, you know, I certainly am guilty personally of not always seeing my son's independence as fully as I should. And I just really encourage families to beginning to think about their sons or daughters as adults and with rights. And I think it's a really important piece and sometimes hard for families to relate to. This is my son's, my son is verbal, but not strongly so. So his artwork and his typing are really the ways in which he communicates to us what's important to him. And he tells me he drives his own bus. So that's his way of saying, it's my life and I get to make those critical decisions. And which is not to say he doesn't recognize that he lives in a family system and that he relies strongly on the family system, but he demands that we hear what's important to him, and it needs to be central to our planning process. And then finally, you just have to continue to educate and advocate. I know you've been doing it for a long time. It's exhausting, but you'll get much better results if you continue to educate yourself and advocate. So as many of you know, the formal transition process begins in the school system at age 14. As Beth said, it can begin much earlier. And it's formalized for all students with IEPs. There are many steps along the way. This is the 3L Place homepage. We recently, about 6 months ago, developed something we call the TTT. It's the Transition Tools and Tips. There is a lot of information out there. And before everybody came on, a few of us were talking about there being too much information sometimes, and it's overwhelming to figure out what to do, where to go, where to start. So we've given you another guide. No, so we tried to organize something chronologically, include links that we really felt were very important. I mean, there are a lot of great organizations that publish great information, and they're featured throughout the TTT. But we were selective in terms of what we felt was most helpful and most concise. And you can find it on our webpage, which is 3lplace.org. But I believe you're also going to get a PDF of this, and all you have to do is click on it and you'll get it. So here's the TTT. And as I said, we've organized it by age. We've kind of got a to-do list and by age, and then here again, I'm not sure of the ages of everyone participating, but this is the form that you're going to see that your sons and daughters teachers are going to present you with, which is kind of the transition planning form. Again, you're going to be updating this each year as your son or daughter matures and you're adding new areas of interest or plans to their transition planning form. So again, this is the to-do section. Then there's things to start thinking about. such as, do I feel like I need an advocate in this process? There's nothing to be ashamed. I think we could all use advocates. And so you really want to consider that. Who else do you want to be on your transition team? It can be other members of your families. It could be good friends. It could be clinicians that have guided you over the years. So you want to make sure that the transition team is inclusive. And then you need to start thinking about how you're going to pay for the range of services that your son or daughter is going to need, because the state service budget that you're going to get is hopefully going to provide you with some of it. It's certainly not going to provide you with all of it. And so at the end of the TTT, you get to check things off, which I find very rewarding. And I at least kind of say, okay, I did that. And then now I'm going to go on to the next thing. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is part of this transition process is how your son, daughter, family, important members of their team look at the life ahead for them. You know, what is their trajectory for a good life? And I discovered the life course framework just a few years ago. It's not that old. I think it's probably only been around for 6 years. I think it's an incredibly strong tool. It's largely free. It's on a website, and they have worksheets, and they have videos kind of on how you can work on each worksheet with whom. So it's really self-explanatory. You still have to be disciplined about it, but I think it's an incredibly useful tool, and I recommend it to families highly. I wished it had been around when I was doing some of the life planning that I did a while back, but I'm starting to incorporate some of these tools as we continue to move through my son's life. I'm going to share about the first 5 minutes of this video that I think just offers great perspective on what this tool offers families. So here it is.
One of the core principles of the Life Course framework is really, how is the work driven by self-advocates and families? What's key to our work is really understanding what it is that they need in their lives so we can figure out the practices and policies to best support that. Everything that you will see today is driven by those voices and those needs. So now I'm going to provide an overview of the Life Course framework that we use to really guide our thinking and how we develop the tools that we use. At the core of this framework is the belief that all people have the right to live, love, work, and play, and pursue their dreams as all others in their community. What's really important about this belief is that there was a time where people with developmental disabilities didn't have access to these rights. So this framework really highlights the fact that everyone has this same right as a citizen in the United States. The other importance of that core belief is the concept of all. And I want to kind of take you to really understanding what we mean when we start talking about all. When we first set out to develop this framework, we wanted to really recognize that when we're talking about people specifically with developmental disabilities, we aren't just talking about those that receive services, but rather all people, the 4.7 million people that are estimated to have a developmental disability in the United States. As we developed the framework, though, we realized this framework was something that was much more universal, that could be used for all people. It could be used for family members, it could be used for grandparents, it could be used by siblings, for lots of different reasons, not only for the reason of helping people with developmental disabilities. So I'd like to set the stage so that you understand why we needed to come up with this framework. If you look at the circles on the left and just think about your own life, you're an individual person. You have family, you have friends, you exist in the community. And if you start thinking about those with developmental disabilities and how they've received supports over the years, you start realizing that you have the person, you have services wrapped around them, sometimes special education, sometimes adult services, then you have the family, and then you have the community. And as we got focused more and more on those services, what we soon realized was that it was the person being cut off from their family and friends, which was exactly what we did not intend to do with our support system. So this framework really recognizes that and really attempts to figure out a way that how can we support people within the context of their family, their friends, and their community. So if you look at the circles on the right-hand side, you'll see the image there that we're trying to achieve. We want to help people be where they are with the families and friends around them and the community they live in, but figure out a way to integrate services and supports so they can have the good life that they're desiring. One of the reasons that we believe that integrated services and supports are so important are that there are many things that are changing. There's pressures coming from lots of different ways. We have self-advocates and families really demanding that their rights are recognized as citizens in this country. We also have the response of federal policy changing, where we're developing a federal infrastructure that really supports those rights to live in the community, have employment, have friends, and be a part of the society. But there's also other realities. We know that there's not enough money in the world for every person with a developmental disabilities to have all of the services that they desire. So we need to think differently. We need to figure out a way to develop an infrastructure so that everyone can have a good life, but utilizing lots of types of supports. What we also know is there's a lot of changing demographics. We know that baby boomers are getting older. They are going to require supports and services, and they're going to have a demand for them differently as well. We also know that the pool of people providing these supports is getting smaller and smaller, which is really causing us to have a crisis in terms of the day-to-day supports and how they're provided to people. One of the core principles...
Sorry. I must say that for me, those 5 minutes just really, they are very consistent with my thinking as I went into creating 3L Place. Community is really critically important, and what we're looking for is integrated services and supports, not isolated or segregated services. So I just think that for me, and hopefully for you, that her message really provides some useful perspective. I'm now going to transition into what the transition process leads you to. And I know that there are other state departments that many of you will work with. The Massachusetts Department of Developmental Services is probably the one that the predominant number of you will work primarily with. So qualifying for services is a very critical piece. It takes preparation. It takes having all your paperwork and tests and evaluation lined up really well. And I think that that's something to really think about when you're working with your school system, to make sure that they're also packaging this information in a way that presents your son or daughter's needs in not necessarily the best light, but the most accurate light. So, because you don't want to understate the needs of your son or daughter. You want to present them accurately, and you want to make sure that if your son has or daughter has highs and lows, that people need to recognize that they need to be covered, so that the lows are always covered. There are choices for services at the Department of Developmental Services. They are kind of traditional services that really represent about 95% of the current DDS budget. And there are self-directed services. In 2014, the legislature enacted the Massachusetts Real Lives Law, which is a really important law for all of you. It essentially provides individuals with the right to choose how they want to secure services, whether they want to do it through traditional programming or whether they want to do it through self-directed programming. And the Real Lives Law also specifies that the budget or money that the department allocates for you be the same or equivalent, whether you're in traditional services or self-directed services. So in the traditional service model, and again, like the IEP in school-based services, in adult services, you have an ISP, and it is an important document. You need to pay attention to it. It needs to be current. It needs to identify clearly the needs of your son or daughter. So the ISP is kind of your core statement of what your needs are. Once you're deemed eligible, the department, again, assuming you're choosing traditional services, the department will refer you to several service providers. And, you know, there are some household names. There's like VinFen and Advocates and HMEA and Jewish Family and Children's Services. There's, I don't know, probably 75 agencies in Massachusetts, maybe more, that provide services, traditional services. Now, the range of services kind of break down into day services, and they break down and then residential services. Residential services are limited to a small number of prioritized eligible individuals. They're very expensive, and the department determines eligibility based on some pretty strict criteria. Day services, such as community-based day services, adult companion, in-home supports, are the traditional types of services delivered through the traditional model. I like to think, well, I'll go to the next thing, and then I'll put it in a business context, if you forgive me. So the next component, or the next set of choices, is self-directed services. And once again, you have the ISP, which is a really critical document. And in the ISP, it outlines needs and it outlines goals and vision. And based on that, you, or the individual and their family and their team, decide what types of programming, learning opportunities, community activities would best serve their needs. And they utilize a budget provided by DDS, which is managed by a third party. So within self-directed services, there's something called the participant-directed program, and there's something called the agency with choice. But fundamentally, they're both self-directed services. What I like to help people think about, again, currently, traditional services represents about 95% of the DDS budget, self-direction about 5%. In a business context, I think people have heard the notion of business-to-business models and business-to-consumer models. Sorry, I am a former business person. So traditional services is business to business. You've got DDS that creates major contractual relationships with big agencies that then provide services to individuals. In self-directed, you've got DDS as the contractor providing budgets to individuals. So it's a business to consumer model. So they're very different models of service delivery. And I think that's one of the reasons why Massachusetts and other states have been so slow to really push self-direction, because there's a lot that's different about it. So as I said earlier, the Real Lives Law says that you can choose either traditional or self-directed services, and that your budget should be equivalent. As just to give you an example, and it is truly a highly generalized example, because a CDBS budget is contingent on what level of need. And there are like 5 or 6 different levels of needs. But a typical CDBS budget would cost approximately $30,000 in fiscal year 2022, 2023.
Deborah, for just a minute, could you please tell us what CDBS means?
I'm so sorry. Community-based day service program. And that's kind of the workhorse at DDS in terms of, so community-based day service programs are meet 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Some programs start at 8 and go to 2, some at 8:30, so there's 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 days of the year, 50 weeks of the year, maybe 52. I think it's 50 though. And that is the real workhorse in terms of traditional day services. The other ones, which are adult companion and in-home supports, are based on one-to-one levels of support and are a good bit more expensive. In a community-based day program, you'll generally have one staff person supporting 6 or 7 individuals. So the ability to personalize programming is limited by the workload to the individual who's providing services. Okay, and then the autism program, which is a separate, it's based on individuals having an autism diagnosis, but not having a intellectual disability. The budgets are around $25,000 to $30,000. However, COVID has impacted the lives of all people. It's impacted the lives of all people, but it's impacted the lives of individuals and families who are already engaged in the adult services arena and are entering it. Because there's been an acute, the workforce shortage was developing anyway. And one of the problems in service delivery in adult services is that the individuals on the front lines, those direct service people who are supporting 6 or 7 individuals with developmental disabilities, they have been paid somewhere between $13, $14, $15 an hour. And their jobs are really, really hard. And they aren't given a lot of supervision. They're not given curriculum. So it's a really hard job. And with COVID, a lot of people left that line of work, and a lot have not come back. And as a consequence, many participants could no longer, aside from the pandemic itself, there just isn't the workforce there to support them. So in a conversation I was having with the folks at the ARC, they shared that maybe 3 months ago, there were 5,000 individuals who had been receiving services in day programs that were not getting any services. So there's this huge hangover of unsupported people that were already in the system, to say nothing of people coming into the system. So DDS is currently directing transitioning families to utilize self-directed services because they're not in a position to offer traditional services. And the information provided by DDS about what the budgets are going to be, where they might find service providers, how much they can pay their service providers, has been less than clear. And it really is very different from one area office to the next. So it's contributed to a lot of confusion on the part of transitioning families. So here it's just 3L Place is a model for self-direction. We started it a while ago. It's based on a ratio of 1 staff person to 3 individuals. It's based on a staff profile that is people with, most of my staff have graduate degrees, 3 are licensed. This is out of a staff of 6. And they're compensated commensurate with what school systems compensate people. So we don't have staff turnover, and it's based on curriculum, and it focuses on lifelong learning. So it's about helping people progress in their life towards personalized goals. And I'm happy to talk about that in greater detail if anybody's interested. So just to kind of recap, you need to start the transition process early and continue. Presume competence on the part of your rising adult and engage them in the process consistently, and continue to educate and advocate. And I hope these tools are useful to you. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
I have a question.
Okay, who was that?
Kristen Misia.
Hi, Kristen. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. What is your question?
So she was mentioning that we should start early. So my daughter will be 22 in May. And when you say start early, I don't know what you mean by start early.
So I presume, Kristen, that your daughter is enrolled in a school and has an IEP?
She does.
Okay. And have you been meeting with your school personnel and working on a transition plan?
Well, they keep telling me basically what you just said, that, you know, there's a lot of places that have closed and there's not a lot of staff, and they keep telling me that we should wait as we get closer to her turning 22, but yet we're less than a year away, and I'm not really getting too far with DDS. They keep switching my coordinator, or the mailbox is full. So I'm not really sure what to do.
Okay. Deb, before you start answering that question, could you take your PowerPoint down, please?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I'll stop sharing my screen. Yeah, pardon me.
Thank you. So yeah, you know, this is it. So this is a question that actually came up in the questions that we got ahead of time. You know, how do people plan ahead of time? What kinds of things should they be doing to plan? Because DDS is a part of that process, absolutely. But what are some other things and other considerations that people should be doing? You know, people are concerned about, can their loved one get a job, social interactions, peer groups, job. There's a whole plethora of things to prepare for. So as you know, you were thinking about putting together your tips and tricks and things like that, how does someone attack behemoth of a job, because there's lots to consider.
Well,
So I'm sorry, this is Rebecca. Just a reminder from our interpreters, just slow down just a second.
Sure. Sorry about that,
No
Carlos.
problem.
So again, I think you have to back up a little bit. And the way in which the transition tips and tools is organized, it is organized by age, because by the way, there are things that you should be signing up for at the age of 16 and 17 and 18 that will eventually, so for instance, my son, just after 11 years on the Section 8 wait list, just got a Section 8 voucher. But it was really important to have a Section 8 voucher application in place at the age of 18. So one of the things in that TTT list are some of the things that you need to think about earlier on. So that's one of the things, the planning things. There are individuals who are really oriented and ready for engagement in the workforce. And again, if that fits what your son or daughter is really geared to, the school system should be providing them with internship opportunities and should be doing some of that pre-vocation and early vocational work. There are a lot of people who are not well suited to full-time or even part-time work. And so there are other ways in which you want to support and engage them, or recognize that at a later point in, maybe at age 25 or 26, that's something that they may be ready for. But coming right out of school at age 22, they need to be focusing on some other skills for independence. So I don't know that I answered your question, but I think that individuals, again, part of the life course planning tool, part of those things is you need to tease out what's really important to you or to your family member and put that up front. There are, Best Buddies does a lot in the workforce development area. There are providers, there are traditional providers that are really geared to, Work Inc. is really geared to supporting individuals who are ready for the workforce. So again, there aren't openings right now in those traditional programs, but there will eventually be. And so you want to kind of line yourself up for those entities that really support employment opportunities.
I think the other thing that, and Charting the Life course talks a lot about this, we are almost programmed to focus on where can I get services? And we focus only on that as a way to support our loved ones, when there are so many other ways that we can, in fact, support our loved ones. And the pandemic really taught us how being dependent on services really doesn't work well for our families. So really thinking about where are some of the other relationships that you have, community-based supports that are not disability related, technology, for example, and even looking at the individual with special needs that has what their assets are, what do they bring to the table that you can leverage. And some of the Charting the Life course tools really help you to think those things through, because it can get very frustrating when you're trying to get in contact with someone from DDS. And this is no slight on DDS. DDS is facing quite a challenge right now. They have programs that they traditionally have that they can't staff. And so they have current people whose needs are not met and more coming in. So you have you have this kind of a pool of money and increasing needs, and you're not able to actually meet the needs that are in front of you. So we have to get better at really figuring out how to create some better systems that aren't so dependent on other agencies. So one of the questions that came up was, I think you may have referenced an advocate. They're wondering, when you're looking for an advocate, are you talking about an educational advocate, or are there people who specialize in helping families with the transition and with adult services?
I think you need to be looking at people who specialize in adult service transition. And there are fewer and farther between than people who are, working in the educational advocacy area, but they do exist, and they are gearing up more. There's a bit of a tug of war going on within DDS on the whole role of a support broker. There are some people who advocate for independent support brokers. DDS at this point feels that support brokers should be internal. And then there are people who just go ahead and hire support brokers anyway because they feel that they really need it. Without a support broker, they're not going to maximize what they can get from DDS. I also fully support what you're saying about looking at your community and finding activities that fulfill the ambitions and goals. So my son's an artist. He loves all things art. And he does, he takes art classes, and he belongs to a pottery studio, and he's not an athlete. I have friends whose kids absolutely enjoy Special Olympics and get a lot from Special Olympics. There are the rec departments in various towns that have therapeutic rec programs that are pretty robust. So I think that people have to think creatively and align themselves, or kind of look for things that they know their sons or daughters are just inherently interested in, because you're not going to get all your needs met, even in an environment where DDS was fully functional and wasn't struggling with workforce shortages. You're not going to get all of your needs met through a state agency funded programming.
Can you talk a little bit, let's just step back from that for a moment. And, you introduced the transition planning form earlier in your presentation as a tool that many people, all of us, will be using starting at age 14. Can you talk a little bit about what the purpose of that form is and how that can help a family and a student in planning for adult services or just an adult life?
Well, I do think, and I frankly, sorry, I have an eyelash in my eye. I think that it asks you some of the questions that the life course process kind of tees up and helps you figure out. So some of us don't have the time or skill to kind of take the perspective and say, well, what is it that my son or, you need to take the time to talk to your son or daughter, and your son or daughter may not talk, so you need to figure out a way in which you have a communication that you begin to understand what it is that they really enjoy and what's important to them in their life. And so I think that transition document by the school system is, in some senses, a document that represents the culmination of the planning process. And if you don't have the benefit of pulling apart the pieces through the planning process, it's going to be that much harder for you to create a robust transition document.
Yeah, it's the transition planning form is really something that should be used to inform the IEP as you're moving forward and really figuring out how to equip this young person to be able to have that good life that you talked about going forward. And it's where you also introduce that partnership that happens between parents, community, and school districts, right? So you're looking at what are the needs that happen as a result of a disability. And then from there, what are some things that we need to be working on that's going to support why we have special education to begin with, that independent living, that ability to integrate into the community. If it's possible for them to be working, what does that look like? If they want post-secondary education or trade school, what kinds of things would prevent them from getting to those goals? And that's what we need to then decide, what do we need to put in place for skill development to get people to that place?
That's really well said, because you still have 8 years in the school system when you start that process. So by beginning to tease out what your goals are and what your vision is, you can begin to identify areas that you really want to work on and that you want the help of the school system and that individualized educational plan to help get you there. So if being part of the workforce and being interested in specific types of work begins to kind of percolate to the top of your priorities when you're 14, 15 years old, that needs to be really part of an important part of your school-based learning process over the next several years. So it really does help you focus your school-based resources on skill development that's going to take you to a higher level once you're out of school and you don't have the benefit of as much individualized training and education.
And then, of course, that's once you've identified some of the skills that are necessary, one way to do that is through those transition assessments, right? And so that's why really looking at the range of skills that are necessary and understanding what are the strengths that person already brings to the table and that we can build upon. And then from there, how do we also then add to that so that they have those skills to be independent? One of the other questions that came through was around transitioning to adult medical care, which is such a fun transition for our loved ones, right? And wanting to know if there was a written guide for transitioning to adult medical providers. I have some information about that, but I didn't know if you had some as well before I went into what I knew.
A sigh. I personally have had a challenge with that and continue to work on that. And I've done some, I've participated with Operation House Call that the ARC sponsors in educating young, actually my son has been a speaker through his typing to future physicians on what they need to do to better serve individuals with developmental disabilities. But there's a huge gap that exists, and it takes knocking on doors and then of physicians that are willing to do it. And then there's still a lot of education. I mean, there was, again, when my son was little, his pediatricians knew nothing about why he had the unusual challenges he did. They knew nothing. And then once they say, oh, he's got PDD-NOS or he's got autism, they kind of threw up their hands and said, well, that's what it is. So I'm not going to really address his medical issues. Now that's come a long way. So we've kind of trained pediatricians to be much more attentive to the medical needs of our special children. but that same process has to happen at the adult level.
Yeah, there is a lot of work that's happening out there locally and nationally to address a really, really important issue, because the good news is we've learned a lot about how to keep our kids alive, but in the pediatric world, but we haven't gotten better at making sure that adult providers understand our kids. One tool that's out there that's actually quite comprehensive and has a similar approach to what you have with your tips and tools is Gut Transition. They're a fantastic website for resources for caregivers, for youth and young adults, and for medical providers. So I encourage people, if you're looking for that tool or looking for that resource, that's there. In the meantime, over at the Division for Children and Youth with Special Health Needs, we're working on a health transition toolkit. And our team over there was just recently trained in the Charting the Life course tools, and with a particular emphasis on the Healthy Living channel piece of it, to really support families in being able to really tease out some of the things that you were talking about, Deborah, because there is so much to consider. One person asked a question, I think we'll close with this, which we don't have a lot of time to talk about, but if you have somebody who isn't eligible for residential services, what happens when their caregiver passes away? How do you plan for something like that? What are some of your kind of initial thoughts on what we could do about that, Deb?
Well, I mean, I think that that's an incredibly important question, and I encourage families to start thinking about that when they're of the right age and their kids are the right age to begin planning for independence from the family. Now that, of course, when you don't have residential services, how do you do that? How do you afford that? Becomes enormously challenging. DDS does often come to the rescue, albeit it's after delays when somebody's caregiver departs this world and there's kind of no plan. But I think families need to be really, really tuned in to that issue. It's an extremely difficult issue. I know with my own son, who's now been living apart from us for 6 years, he asks every week to move home. And I just tell him that, like his sister, he has to have his own place. He's always welcome at home, but he needs to have his own place. So it's tough. It's really tough, but to me as a parent, it's the scariest issue. And that needs to be part of your planning process, and you need to kind of stick to your guns to a certain extent. It's really hard to tell somebody you adore that they can't move home to be with you. And you have to bring up the fact that at some point mom and dad are not going to be around, and that scares them terribly. But as it probably scares me more. But,
yeah, really.
But it's really an important part of the planning process.
And it's interesting you really do have to think in terms of where are some of those other critical relationships that might be able to support your loved one. I remember even thinking about this with my own son, like, could I make sure he had his own home and did not have to be in that situation?
Right.
Who was going to have that responsibility of helping him with his decision making and his health care and all of that? It's a daunting question to ask, and it's definitely something you want to start thinking about early, so that so you're not surprised, and that kind of infrastructure is set in place. You talked earlier about Section 8 and perhaps that would be an avenue. So this is a topic that we could literally spend an entire weekend conference on, right?
No, it's true, but it is really an incredibly, I mean, that's kind of the kind of planning that's going on in my family right now is, I'm 66 years old, so I can't ignore all of those things. And I have, so that's part of our life course planning right now, is what happens when my husband and I are gone. And it's a really important next step.
Well, unfortunately, we are just beyond 6 o'clock. And so, as is always happens when we're involved in such a rich conversation, we've run out of time. But Deb, we thank you so much for joining us today and helping us to think about how to really look at transition, how to start early with our thought process, providing us with some tools on how to do that, because I can speak from personal experience. Looking at the transition planning form at age 14, you look at some of those questions and you go, I have no idea.
I think tools make me feel better. I am inherently somebody who needs to get my hands around things. And so tools, I hope, will be helpful to you all. And it's, there's just a lot of problem solving. I've learned along the way, and I'm continuing to learn, and I've learned, a lot today. So thank you for letting me participate.
Yes, well, thank you for being with us. And as Rebecca said at the beginning, we do have a team here at the Federation who is available to you to answer all of your questions and to help you to find resources. And so do know that we're here to support you. There is this session will be recorded, so people will be able to access it. And the Federation, of course, will let you know when there are some events in the future to help you to do this planning that we have been talking about. So thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight. I hope we've been able to at least help you to start thinking about some of these critical issues. And as we said, any questions that we weren't able to answer tonight, we will make sure we find another way to address them. And yes, Tanya, we'll have someone call you so that we can address your question. I'm sorry that we ran out of time and we couldn't do it here today. And I want to wish everyone a good night, and also to remind everybody that we will not be having a Connecting Family session in August. So we will see you again in September. We know August is a crazy month for vacation and prepping for school starting again. So with that,
I'm so sorry, Beth. This is Rebecca. One more, just for 2 seconds. We are in the planning stages of bringing back Planning a Life, our conference. We'll have 2 tracks, one for folks who have their children aging out, and one track at a different date for families who are looking into college. So I'm going to ask folks to think, just keep October 14th and 15th open. We will follow up with more information, but we've got some really wonderful conversations happening, and we'll share that with you as soon as possible.
Fantastic. So please note October 14th and 15th for our next Planning the Life. That will be a wonderful opportunity for you to get your arms around so many of the topics that we talked about this evening, and so many more that we couldn't even get to because we just barely scratched the surface. So we look forward to seeing you there. And we will be recording this, and it will be, you will get a link so you'll be notified when that's happened, and it will be posted on our Federation website.
Before you go, can I say something, please, on that?
As long as it's very quick, because we do need to close up.
My name is Todd Jefferson. I'm a special needs young adult, and that question, the host put, I don't understand, but I want to know why the special needs cannot go to the, to go to the program. It's hard for the parents to take the special needs young adult.
Yeah,
it's hard for the parents to take the special needs young adults to the program. It's hard. You guys need to find a ride for us to go to our program.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tanya. It's very hard on the parents. It's very hard on the individual. Ultimately, everybody is in need of some form of support. And we're working really hard across the state to change that challenge. But we hear you loud and clear, and we couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, but we are up for the challenge, aren't we? So we will do what we can. And as always, as I've heard before, parents are often the biggest and strongest force to be reckoned with for making these things happen. Partnered with the individuals themselves, we will find a solution at some point. So I stay encouraged. Please take care of yourselves, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again in September. Oh, and thank you to the interpreters, especially, and my apologies for talking so fast, but thank you to the interpreters for being with us and enabling all of our families to have access to this information. We have a dream team of interpreters, and I couldn't be more thankful. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was fun.